Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jiri Vondrasek and I'm head of Czech infrastructure for biological data, sitting at the Institute of Organic Chemistry and Biochemistry. And title of my talk is, we are talking about big data, and we can actually answer that question right away. I was a bit afraid that my contribution will be completely off topic, but from the first talk, I actually got some idea that we are probably talking about the same problem all over the discipline. So let me first introduce that infrastructure, which I would like probably present it in a European context. Then I will focus a bit on the human data or overlap with biomedical sciences, which I think would be kind of interesting because some of the problems I saw today in the previous lecture, we already solved or probably we are now going to solve it. So let's see how helpful would be my contribution to that meeting. So going back, there is a big problem we are calling data challenge. So if you look on the map of the Europe, and we are now talking only about Europe, not talking about America or Asia, so data production at large number of sites in Europe is increasing enormously. It's because of the technology advances. So all that next generation sequencing machines, all the proteomics and the other genomic stuff are actually producing so enormous amount of data that we never actually faced that problem before. Not only human genomics, but also microbiology, environmental markers, and many, many others. If I ask you what you think the big data is, so some of you probably say there's 100 of gigabytes. Some of you probably say 100 of terabytes, but true is that now we are talking about tens of petabytes and we are just in a start. So we are dealing with many problems. We have to be scalable. We have to deal with incomplete, conflicting, and incorrect data. And if we compare different institutions, so interoperability between the data is the major problem of that. Technologically, we cannot handle it at one side. You probably know there are centers for data, but they are too small to capture all the data which are produced now. So computer speed is increasing 2 times in 1.5 years. On the other hand, only DNA sequence, doubling every 6 to 8 months. So you can imagine that the overwhelming all the archive and storages or resources will be kind of the really challenging question it is already a challenging question now, but it will be even more in the future. So what is the ELIXIR? What is the infrastructure which is dealing with that enormous amount of the data? So it was actually ESFRI project, which means that actually connect the European countries. We have also observers from Canada, South America, South Africa, and Australia. And ELIXIR is an intergovernmental organization. It brings together life science resources. Most importantly, there are databases, there are software tools, there are data standards, and computer resources. And it's actually worth to mention that to all of that particular fields, we are also providing the training materials, how to deal with that data, how to deal with that infrastructure. So the goal of the ELIXIR is to coordinate life science resources from across Europe so they form a single infrastructure. So being a part of that, all the institutions which are contributing in one particular country are somehow coordinated not only at the national way, but also at the international or European scale. ELIXIR actually started the existence in 2013 and currently has 22 members and 2 observers. All that countries which you see here on that slide are actually asking about a solution for the same question. It's a big data challenge that needs to be overcome, and it needs to be overcome by distributed infrastructure. We have a lot of questions which we are going to answer in a future. It means mainly the managing, safeguarding, and increasing volume of the data must be divided between the members. And ELIXIR is organized in such a way that is as a distributed infrastructure organized into nodes. So centralized, it means hub, which is residing at EBI in Wellcome Trust in Kingston is kind of the organization and, let's say, administrative units which coordinates all the effort for all the members. And if you see the node, it means that at a particular country there is one node which is coordinating all the institutions which are contributing to that infrastructure. In Czech Republic, there are 14 members, universities, Academy of Sciences, institutions, and many, many others. And you can imagine how scalable is that infrastructure, because more institutions would probably become new members. So they built the nodes as a local bioinformatics capacity. And bioinformatics capacity doesn't mean only the tools or analysis. It means all the infrastructure which is behind, including the data archive and computational power. And that ELIXIR nodes build on the national strength. So, for example, in Belgium, they have a data assembly and annotation, which are kind of the leading institutions. In the UK, there are more like personalized medicine-oriented research. So we are focusing node to some particular area, which we can bring the new achievements and share it with the others. So this was the organization from that kind of country point of view. But under that, there is a layer on which that infrastructure is actually working. And you can see in this picture that all of that, what we are sharing, is based on the 5, we call it platforms. And these platforms are somehow comprising all knowledge today, which are giving a new direction on compute, data, interoperability, tools, and training. So below all that layers, all across the Europe, we are actually having that 5 platforms like the pillars of the infrastructure. Around that pillars, you can imagine that there is a project, and the project is somehow focused. And in ELIXIR, we do it via, we call it communities. Communities are, let's say, the community of the researchers or the other people interested in the biological data, which are addressing the specific question. So, for example, you have a marine metagenomics, we have a human data, we have a rare diseases community, and so on. And the way how the communities emerge is that it's a shared interest to somehow share also the knowledge across the borders of the European countries. So these platforms are the basis for all the projects I'm actually showing here. There are about 11 of matured communities which are bringing kind of a unified way how to deal with the data in the particular field. And this will be much more important in the future, because I can imagine that even for the medical sciences, you can create a community which can actually address some of that question, which that infrastructure provide the answer on. So what are the challenges? So we have the distributed infrastructure with millions of users. We have to manage and somehow make interoperable amount of the data. So how we can actually share that knowledge, how we can actually distribute that knowledge about the formats, interoperable semantic. We have to create a capacity which is actually aiming to store all the data. So compute capacity for the storing and the integrating clinical and other data into that infrastructure. So for that, we need a scalable and sustainable infrastructure, and also scalable and sustainable funding. And the funding is always the weakest point of any kind of the project which are aiming for the whole European space. So how we are funded, how the ELIXIR is funded. So every node, it means every country which is actually established node, is funded via internal funding strategy. Because they are on the roadmap, so there are S3 infrastructures which are funding from the government. All of that nodes are actually having that way of the funding. On the other hand, the ELIXIR, which are contributing or somehow gathering the members' contribution, can also contribute to, let's say, development of certain field or certain direction by the implementation studies or some other instruments. They will give you back part of your contribution you provide for that old ELIXIR infrastructure. So from one point of view, we are totally dependent on the national funding. From the other hand, we have only part of it, which is actually specified by the hub and the direction in the program, what we will be developing in the future. But there are also necessary to identify scale of the funding challenge. How much money will we need in the future? And you can imagine that bringing together new and new data providers will give you more and more problems and put them into the same unified way and actually get funds for that. So ESFRI is actually giving some of a direction how to calculate the cost of the infrastructure, and there is one of the options which are showing that ELIXIR is doing quite economic way. We are not only relying on that kind of the funding. There are a lot of EU-funded projects for either large infrastructure or a scientific project where the infrastructure should be involved. And you can see that you have about 5 or 6 currently addressed calls. For example, European Open Science, Cloud Life, FAIR Plus, InfraDev 03, which actually ELIXIR was just awarded. It's a project called ELIXIR Converged, and is dedicated to some specific way what to do with the data in the future and how to handle that. So there are 3 sources of the funding. There is a European project, there are national funding, and there are internal funding of the infrastructure. And it actually relies on the contribution coming from the member states. So what is the most important thing what ELIXIR actually tried to address from the very beginning? Most of you are probably using the databases, which are actually databases freely accessible and actually serve the whole scientific community. ELIXIR actually named their data core resources. Some of them are financed via different mechanisms. You know UniProt, you know probably GeneBank, you know many other Orphanet or Orphanata. They are funded in a different way, usually by the government or probably consortium of the institutions. So a set of European data resources, which has a fundamental importance to the vital life science community, are now ELIXIR core resources. It means that the members guarantees that they will not be discontinued in the future, and they guarantee also they will be handled in a most patient and the care. So these ELIXIR data core resources, you look on some of that resources, for example, Orphanata or Orphanet, you always see that there is a logo of the ELIXIR saying it belongs to the data sets, which are particularly important for the whole community, and these who are providing access to it guarantees that in the future. So we are looking for the way how to actually finance that resources for the community, and you are probably aware of most of that resources. But we are walking a little bit farther beyond that scope of the European landscape. So there is a Global BioData Coalition, which is actually having a name to find out the resources to cover and run all that major databases and archives. So Global BioData Coalition is now being formed, and the reason is that we need a coalition of funders worldwide to coordinate and sustain global biodata landscape. For example, is a Wellcome Trust, NIH, AMED, and many, many others. This is a 2-year project to develop coalition, and it started in last quarter of the 2018. So it's working now. So they are now looking for the way how to make that financing or how to make that resources sustainable. And actually, the ELIXIR was the one who provided the methodology how to actually run that resources in the future. Now, let's go back a bit to that structure of the ELIXIR, which I already mentioned. So we have that platforms, and around them there are that complemented communities. So you can see some of them which are listed here: marine metagenomics, rare diseases, human data, human plant sciences, proteomics, and many, many others. It means across to Europe or across the countries which are the members of the ELIXIR, there is a movement of the users who need the infrastructure or the solution for a certain part of it. If they actually reach the critical mass, they provide some of the reason why it should be funded by the ELIXIR internally. And ELIXIR promotes that community and make them alive. So the purpose is, first of all, enable to ELIXIR receive diversity of user input requirements. So I'm not quite sure how lab management can actually create a community, but I can imagine that some other direction in the biomedical sciences can do it right now. So we also looking for driving services uptake in user communities and support collaborative standards. I don't know how is your experience, but our experience from the many, many fields is the data which are produced by different technology are not compatible. Even major databases doesn't have the interoperability between them. So this is one of that really important item need to be solved in the close future. And it also fosters collaboration between nodes, because we can actually exchange stuff and the experts which can actually provide a solution for a certain part of the particular biomedical or biological sciences, and also facilitate consortium building for funding application. It means that members actually can create a consortium and apply for the same EU or other grants, which actually give them support of the user community. There are major ELIXIR communities, and I'll be in my next slide focusing only on a few of them. So these mature ELIXIR communities, some of them are rather biological, but 3 of them are dedicated to the human data, or at least to biomedical sciences. It's a federated human data, rare diseases, and human copy number variation. It means there are enough people who are actually calling for unifying the strategy, how to work with that particular task and how to handle that enormous amount of data they can exchange. There are some issues necessary to be solved, and I will mention them in a next slide. But examples of the community achievement is, if you look on the human data, so you can see that there is already existing, we call it ELIXIR beacon implementation. It means something which is able to tell you that there are the data you are looking for. There are human data which you will be probably using. Human data also coordinates federated data management and increase sensitive data accessibility and their reusage. So this is all the issues which are probably kind of the part of the problem, because the data are sensitive and must be somehow protected. In the rare diseases, ELIXIR actually developed a registry over 100 data resources for rare disease research, and comparison and standardization of services, and actually logical step how to actually deal with that different methodology in that particular 2 communities. So how does ELIXIR support human data research? I don't know if it's directly related to the biomedicine, but at some extent I see a very much of the overlap on that. So as I mentioned, we have a federated human data, human copy number variation, and rare diseases. So the vision is to facilitate discoverability, access, sharing, and analysis of genomics data. Most of the problem of the genomics is that all the data are actually sitting in the country where they were produced in. And we are now talking about a solution of problems related to rare diseases, other types of the data which are related to some other, let's say, diseases of other kind. And we have to demonstrate how to use that infrastructure and impact translation of genomics into the medicine. I think it was mentioned in previous lectures that we are working with that type of data. We have all that mass spec or, let's say, proteomics data. We have a genomics data. We have all of them, but not together. How we can actually address that question? How do we know that, for example, in Spain, there are the data from the cohorts we are going to work with and it will be helpful to it? So this is one of the things which actually ELIXIR address. So the vision is how to understand disease is to develop and test novel pharmacological hypotheses and actually go in the patient stratification and personalized medicine to unleash the possibilities of the genomics and health. Particular profiling an individual in many, many terms of the biological data mean you are now facing the complexity of the problem and you can have the tools actually to get outcome of it and results which will be helpful in a treatment. So what kind of data are we talking about? If you look on the biomedical facilities now, so mostly what are they doing are genotyping, phenotyping. There are a lot of data from the healthcare. There is a potential usage as a biospecimen or patient recall. I just remember the lecture when you get that level of your sugar actually right away from your mobile phone. So if you can imagine that it goes to the archive, then you will have the analytical tools which will be then useful to get the results out of it. This is exactly the way how that data are going to be used in the future. There are some movement in the European scene, and there are genomics projects which are going across ELIXIR members. So Czech Republic are, in lucky situation hosting two of them. One is funded governmentally, the second is funded public-private funding, and you can see the network of that similar genomics-based project all across to Europe. And I'm talking about it because there is now in place one project which is called 1 Million Genome Project. You probably heard of it. So European countries, some of them are the part of ELIXIR, some of them not. Some have actually signed that, some of them not. But what is the aim? To collect the data for 1 million individuals, genomic data, and share them. And the sharing, this would be a really kind of the problem, because we need to guarantee that linking access to existing future databases in a way that all the data will be still secure and provide that information that we need. We also need to provide a sufficient scale for the new clinical and impactful association in the research. So how can we then use the data for? Are there already the question from the biomedical community to be answered by that analysis or not? We still don't know. But what is a kind of the pilot? There is other infrastructure, BBMRI, and next speaker will be talking more about it. What ELIXIR and BBMRI did, they actually wrote a roadmap for data sharing. How to do that? How you actually guarantee that the samples you have in your biobank will be shareable with the other members? What are these limitations? What are these borders? And how can we actually need to formulate the rules for the sharing the data? So data needs to be shared transnationally without compromising patient data confidentially. What ELIXIR suggests is authorization and authentication process. Before you even get the access to the data, you have to be guaranteed that you are the user who has all the rights, all the responsibilities. And we call that AI, authorization and authentication identification, our infrastructure. And if you are part of the institution which are signed as one of that members, it's guaranteed that you get the access to their data. So how we do it in the other case, which is called the EGA. EGA, European Genome Phenome Archive. And as I said, locally, all the producers of the human data are actually having mandatorily store the data in the particular country. How we can get these data for all purposes? One of the things is actually build a local EGA archive, build a local EGA. And then how will you get to know that the data you are looking for to compare with, they are somewhere in that space? So you can do it in two different ways. And first is to comprise all the data in one particular archive and then set the rules how you can actually access that data. Or you can do it more clever because you never know how much the data is valuable for you. So we call it Federation in Human Genome Data because the most of their national data sets are stored locally, but we would like to know what is in. And now we are calling about metadata. These are data about what is that archive comprising. Is it really useful for me? So it doesn't tell you what is the particular copy of the DNA from the different human individuals, but tells you what kind of information you have in that archive. So it's based on the suite of interoperable, adapted, and fit-for-purpose standards. Actually guarantees you that you will ask the question, you will actually get the answer. It doesn't matter where the archive is actually stored. This is shown here, and first pilot in the ELIXIR was called Beacon. That beacon means they have metadata about what you are actually looking for or what they store in their archives. So that public data discovery web service tells you that that global search engine for genetic mutations, you just put the question here, and what these beacons will do, they will give you the answer. Yes, the information is here, and you can actually participate either on the sharing of it, or you can get the access if you really need it, which is different story, and the level up. But from that point of view, I think it is very promising that we are now talking about the metadata. And metadata, they are the first things which has to be unified. I don't know how many of you heard about the FAIR principles. FAIR means that data actually fulfill 4 requests. Be findable, interoperable, accessible, and reusable. If you have the data which are fulfilling that criteria, you have a FAIR data and you can share it, mostly by semantic way or semantic web, but you can actually provide that data and get them useful for the others. So how ELIXIR support personalized medicine projects? Because this is something which is sooner or later, it's actually going into that particular movement. Different countries have the different solution already in place. I mean, Switzerland, there are Netherlands who are providing, there is UK who actually have their own strategy how to build up all the consortia of the IT, data analysis, biomedical, law, and the others. So first of all, it's necessary to project in that way that ELIXIR coordinates some of the work on the data by the nodes. So they create what we call deposition databases. Then they are lighting information about it by that beacon network. And project can find the information, for example, on rare diseases from Orphanet. You also get training material. You will see which tools are used for the analysis of the data, and you also will see what are the rules, how you can share the data by fair sharing. So if we are really in the future, we'll go with some unified way, how we can get access even to some lab data, they all have to fulfill that principles I just been mentioning. And I will probably finish the talk with the vision how that personalized medicine in the future will be structurized. So at one point, you have experimental and clinical data, either from healthcare, pharma, research institutes, and these big data I've been talking about. Then you have to have the data storage and statistical modeling and that algorithm of the machine learning or data mining, which will give you the answer on that particular discipline, like genomics, proteomics, epigenomics, microbiomes, and so on. And then, when you will ask that system about the answering the question, you get an interpretation, which then help put the new knowledge into that research institution, healthcare, and the pharma industry. So I would like to conclude that there is already infrastructure, which is not fully, let's say, compatible with probably your needs, but there is the space where we actually can work together, and if we will know how much of that say, needs of your community could be satisfied, I think that ELIXIR will be the right infrastructure, just an interface between biomedical sciences and biology. Thank you for your attention.